Good day to everyone, wherever you are joining us. My name is Anna Rue, and I'm a folklorist at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. I'm really happy and excited to be co-hosting this event today with FinFest, along with my fellow UW folklorist, Marcus Sederstrom. And today's presentation will include some performances and readings by Diane Jarvi. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, this is a part of a year-long virtual FinFest USA series. There's a music series that we are helping to put together, and we welcome you heartily to this event. I want to open by thanking you for being here today, and thanks to FinFest USA for organizing this fabulous series of events. And also to the Center for the Study of Upper Midwestern Cultures at UW-Madison and the Sustaining Scandinavian Folk Arts in the Upper Midwest Project. Some of you know us as Nordic Folklife as well. I am a part of that project, as is Marcus Sederstrom. We're proud to be co-sponsoring this performance and other events in the music series throughout the year. We have we've got over 80 people here today so far supporting FinFest and the Finnish-American music series, which is really exciting to see. We'll be making some links available to you all so you can follow up for more events in the FinFest series and the Sustaining Scandinavian Folk Arts in the Upper Midwest Project and the Center for the Study of Upper Midwestern Cultures. This is a live program held on the Zoom platform, which means that the presenter, Diane, cannot see you or hear the audience, and you, the audience members, can't see or hear each other. We will have time for questions at the end, though, and you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask your questions, and we will share those questions with Diane towards the end of the program. We are recording this session today, and we will then share it through the FinFest website, as well as the YouTube channel for the Center for the Study of Upper Midwestern Cultures at UW-Madison. And at this point, I'm going to hand the mic over to Marcus, and he will introduce Diane Jarvi today and the way she told her story.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks everyone for being here. My name is Marcus Sederstrom. Like Anna said, I work at the University of Wisconsin-Madison as a folklorist on the Sustaining Scandinavian Folk Arts in the Upper Midwest Project. It's midsummer. We're celebrating Midsummer Johannes, so I hope everyone's getting out. It's a rainy day here, which seems fitting for what I know to be midsummer in the Nordic countries. But I want to start, as I usually do when I welcome everyone to these FinFest music series. I'd like to ask everyone to kind of take a moment to think about place. So, like I said, I work at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which lies on Ho-Chunk land. And I say that to acknowledge where we are and acknowledge that we cannot tell the story of immigration, of history, of heritage, of family and friends without understanding where we came from, where we are, who came before us, and who will remain after us. So take just a moment to think about the people who are in the place you currently live. Think about those who are kin to you and those who aren't. Those connections have helped shape who we are today and helped shape the places we live in today. So I ask that we all embrace that and reflect on that for just a moment, because these ideas of history and heritage and immigration and kinship are a part of what Diane Jarvi's music and poetry examine. And we're going to talk about that a little bit today. So Diane Jarvi is an award-winning poet, a singer, a songwriter, and an all-around wonderful musician. She's a guitarist and a kantele player. She's performed folk and world music on both sides of the Atlantic. She's taught at universities, worked with public schools. She's a teaching artist for the Alzheimer's Poetry Project. She's recorded 7 CDs, written 5 books of poetry, and has taken 3 songs from her CD Bittersweet and 3 poems from her book The Way She Told Her Story, and created 1 short film with Cadence Nelson. Inspired by her mother's writing, her essays, her poetry, her anthologies, Diane's music and poetry has recently been examining the history and heritage through Finnish immigrant experiences, specifically those of women whose stories she amplifies as a way to help us all further understand the sometimes haunting nature of the heritage so many of us carry with us in our everyday lives. Just last week, I think it was, she released her latest album, This Ordinary Day, which she notes was recorded in the fall and winter of 2020, 2021 in her ordinary basement during a not so ordinary year. We're super excited to have Diane join us today to share some of her poetry, her music, and her research into Finnish immigrant women. So I'm going to hand it over to Diane for her to take it away.
Well, hello everyone. Kitos to Anna. I'll call you Anna, and Markus. And Juhannusta to all of you. I'm really honored to be here today. It's another way of being a part of Juhannus in midsummer, I guess. It's often a time for families together. And I feel like over this past very unusual year, Zoom has made all kinds of different kinds of families for all of us to come together and gather. So I'm grateful that we're all able to do that today. And I live near Minnehaha Creek in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which was first inhabited by the mound builders and then the Minnewakan people. And so I thank you for saying that, Marcus. And I think that we always have to remember there are people who have come before us. And I find that's something I do come back to a lot in my work. You know, for someone who I didn't embrace my heritage growing up. I really didn't even like Finnish music very much at all. I've subsequently been a part of like 9 Fin Fests. Been to Finland 6 times, studied briefly at the Sibelius Academy, studied Finnish at the University of Minnesota. There are Finnish songs on 6 of my CDs, plus some inspiration of Finnish poets on my new one. Finnish related topics are on all of my books, except for one. So yes, my heritage is deeply threaded in my tapestry as an artist. So I've found that I've been evolving over the years as a writer and a musician, that I've been drawn even more to the stories of my Finnish ancestors. And as I have been aging, and I think this is something that we all do as we move through the years, I think quite a bit about my parents and their experiences as well as children of Finnish immigrants. So while I was visiting Finland quite a few years ago now, I stood on the land where my grandmother grew up. And I saw by then there was just abandoned buildings and empty fields. And I thought, this is really sad, and yet it sings. There was something there that was a haunting, but not necessarily in a negative way either. So I was there because I received a grant from the Minnesota State Arts Board to kind of work on studying and focusing on writing poetry on the experiences of Finnish immigrant women and their female descendants. So I did some research of Finnish American writers, women writers, and scholars, talked to a lot of friends and relatives to tell me of their mother's stories, their grandmother's stories. They were always generous about that. And I did turn to the writings of my mother, Jarvi, who was a poet, translator, and an editor. And she sort of inspired me, all of her writings, to begin this journey that I had been kind of skirting, but kind of always really interested in, into the voices and the words of Finnish women, immigrants, and their families. So I thought I'd start with a member of my own family, my great aunt Cecilia. And she was never shy. That's putting it mildly. She was always working and always looking for ways to help others. As a young girl, she came to Finland. I mean, she came from Finland, or actually came from Viipuri, which is a part of Karelia that isn't a part of Finland anymore, at age 4. And when she came to Ellis Island, they put her and her mother in a cage. I mean, that's just kind of one of the things that happened to people. Her father was already here, but she learned English right away. So when new people came off the train to Winton, Minnesota, a little tiny place, she translated the new, helped all the people coming in how to get where they wanted to go and what they needed as a very young girl. I would call her a late suffragist and an early feminist. She was known to pass birth control on to women who were needing it. She came here in 1901. So this is a little while ago. She was a journalist. She had her own radio show for years. She was an actor who performed in the Finn halls, and that was in the worker halls, and that was a tradition around the United States for Finnish immigrants to have musical presentations and lectures and lots of theater. And so she would go around the Finn halls in this state as well as New York. And she and her husband would translate Moliere and Shakespeare into Finnish so that they could perform these plays for their community. And so I thought I would read it's the title poem of the book. It's called The Way She Told Her Story. The way she told her story, she told them she was leaving for New York City. But your children, they said. Yes, she said, I know, I have children. And she got on the train. Men have children too. Plenty of them were seated on the train. She had learned how to cross the earth and become someone else. But she knew the land circles back. And then who do you become? She had been like a stone thrown across continents. Still, she liked the train's voice, its score of wheels on switchbacks, the open windows half hum fingering her hair. What she liked best was how a voice could shape words, how those words sat on her tongue and came out firecrackers, sharp and hot, tossed from the stage to the dark shapes seated below. Everything was an old story, and everybody always wanted to hear another, be it doves or ash, the world lit with candle power. Here is where she found a kind of home with velvet curtains and floors to sweep, a pile of scripts thick with ink and social observation, artists muscling wit and props. Only here she could fashion a tale, take this stone and toss it out there herself and make it light and loose as a field of stars, passed from mouth to air, radiant before it disappeared. So I thought I would sing this song that I think, was sung in the Finn halls at the time. I'm sure Cecilia sang it. Sounds like one of her songs. And when I was researching, my one CD called Bittersweet kind of ended up being sort of at the same time as I was working on this book of poetry. And I found this, which was my mother's little red songbook in Finnish. And so I looked through it and I went, oh my gosh, look at these songs. I know these songs. So I decided that I would record this song because I thought it was so important to IWW history as well as the women of who were active in politically and socially. And so see if you can hear this. Oh, that's right. Just gonna scooch this way. Monenlaisia maailmassa tässä on naisia, tiedätte sen. Valtat seisaakin useat tässä, silkipuvassa käys kennellään. Kuningattarit, prinsessat loistaa, valit timatit eit koristaa. Vaan kuumois naita et muista, heissä nähtäessä. She's a rebel girl, working class, strength of this world. From Maine to Georgia, you'll see, they're fighting for you and for me. en bokon sa alla sedan sikkiviorjellen man valta luokan jo valta pikau peikot elvosteni olvoa kun naisetkin taistojen pauha rintamaan saa. She's a rebel girl, working class, strength of this world from Maine to Georgia, you'll see her fighting for you and for me. Yes, she's there by your side, with courage and pride, she's an equal anywhere, and I'm proud to fight for freedom with the rebel girl. Yes, I'm proud to fight for freedom with the rebel girl. So I was so thrilled to find that song in Finnish that I was very determined to record it, and I did. So I thought I would read this poem. It's kind of about, I think the book in itself kind of covers, how we move through sort of loss of place, finding a new kind of place, the whole immigrant experience. And I thought that in so many ways, I think like the immigrant experience today that's happening all over the world is very similar to some of the experiences that the Finnish women had as well. Because I mean, when you came in, and Finnish women were always, if they worked all kinds of different jobs, and of course they were in the service class, and they were often servants or maids or whatever, and that's where we start out. And then they're trying to figure out, like, how do you assimilate, and is this place what I thought it was? And it usually is not. So this poem is I'm sorry, I'm trying to find it here. It's called Skylark on a Stone. She leaves the boarding house each day under gunmetal skies to walk basalt and lava flow, wet wings of the lake folding over her immigrant configuration. In the forest, her camouflage soul wavers and obscures. Sparrows sit on her lap, opening seeds. Fox run right over her shoes. She fell right in with those teams of circling skirts, shipboard and nestled too close. Loss and dream packed tight inside their carpet bags, the wet leaves of all those shawls soaking up damp and recent failure. Her clothes are now shiny in spots, the sharp angles of her body confounding stitches. There is a vagrancy in not belonging. She fumbles her new name like a fallen button. This land is not what she read in the letters. Her feet trip uncut paths, empty hands hold invisible maps with unwritten grids. Still, she is training her young heart to modest settlings. Slurry of yeast in a blue bowl, resurrection of black ink inside a book. When she looks into the forest, she thinks she sees her mother, arms heaped with lupins on Midsummer's Eve. She goes back down to the lake where each cold wave slowly wipes away the old geography, the helpless telling of her distant story. Her bones becoming light, leaning and learning how to lean in, accept this new weight in this new wind. I thought I would talk a little bit about Viola Turpinen, since she's sort of, I feel like, a mentor for all Finnish American women musicians. She She was a second generation Finnish American, actually. And she is probably the first woman accordionist to record in the United States, and certainly the first female accordion star in America. And she started playing in the 1920s and was doing always the upper Midwest circuit, but then eventually based herself out of New York and toured widely all over the US. And it became a tradition for dancers to see her headlining her traveling shows every summer all over the country. And my mother remembers her coming to the Finn Hall. She certainly come to all the Finn Halls. But what I love about Viola is that she didn't just play Finnish music. She was just a great purveyor of it, of course, and a great mentor to everybody regarding it. But she played all music. She's like the world music accordion player. She could just do anything. And she was beautiful. Had a lovely personality, and so I think she certainly inspired many people, non-Finnish people, definitely, as well as certainly all of us who are her followers. So this poem is for her. I wrote it in kind of response. I certainly grew up in a home where we had Viola Torpinen LPs, and my parents would play them on more than one occasion. And I said earlier, I didn't really like that music that much then, but then of course I came to love it later. So this poem is called There Is a Song I Climb Into. It is a dance, pell-mell gunshot, pogo stick polka, too many beers, never fear your dreams, schottish, a what fate allows tango. It is a lake, all swell and skiff of holy rain, drink for impossible thirst, scuttle of flowers swimming at my ears, the dark purple deep suck of mud. It is a coin on a train track, the distant groan of freight, downbeat of wheels, bright face in the sun, small clink under cars, the judged transfer, that lost story. It is an old idea, the unused language of home, the lost merit in forgetting, shadowed tracery of absence, salty rind of a distant coast, birds murmuring through blue air. Listen. So this is a song that I learned from one of Viola's albums. It's called Meillä ei kotia täällä, and it really is this such a kind of iconic immigrant song. And the lyrics, for those of you who don't know Finnish, and I just pretend to. I grew up with it, but I don't know it as well. I'm sure you Finnish people know that I'm mispronouncing things. But the translation is, we have no home here, just guests of whomever it may be. It is our fate to travel strange roads that do not lead us home. Our loved ones live on a peaceful shore, the dearest land in the world, but we left to cross the ocean to a strange land far away.
Meillä ei kotia täällä, olemme jonkun vieret vaan. Vilkohtalo meitä, outoja teitä, kotiin ei milloinkaan. Vilkohtalo meitä, outoja teitä, kotiin ei milloinkaan. Rauhassa rokkaiden ranta, pitämme maakaarnampaa. Me läksimme kerta ympäri merta, avaamme ilmaan. Me läksimme kerta ympäri merta, vähän maailman. Olemme jonkun vaan, vil kohtalo miten, otoja teitä, kotiin milloinkaan. Vil kohtalo miten, otoja teitä, kotiin
So I think Viola sang or performed, played lots of gypsy songs in her repertoire, and I don't know if she ever, I don't think she ever did this one, but I really think she would have if she, it might have, this might have shown up before, or I mean after her time actually. But it's a great gypsy song, and it's in the woman power kind of gypsy song where she's kind of mad and she's fed up. It's like this woman's fed up. She says, yesterday I got so mad. This is not a literal translation, by the way. Yesterday I got so mad, I turned purple. How could I have fallen for an old man and his proposal?
Mustaks muutoin ennäs vastu mennyt. Kuinka saatoin, mammoin kaatoin lepon suostu lintu. Vanhan miehen, kihlan kiilen, heitä tahtoisin jo. Ota päähän ennäs vastu mennyt. Niin kuin maidon, viskan taidon, hessan silloin pois jo. Jälkeen riikkaan, nuoren raakaan, omakseni saan jo.
So I thought I'm kind of hitting on the music part here, but I think it's kind of important to talk about Katre Lami. She was a singer and an actor who came to, well, she was born in Finland in 1901, and she came and immigrated in 1920 and ended up in New York City. And there she met and married a fellow singer by the name of Jukka Lammi. And they were often seen in main roles in the Workers' Theater, the Workers' Hall in New York. And then they were among the Finnish Americans who went to Petroskoye in Russian Karelia. This part of Karelia was once part of Finland, but then was ceded to the Soviet Union after the war. So there was this Karelian fever, which was this recruitment of members of the North American Finnish communities to go to the Karelian region of the Soviet Union to help build a society to implement their ideals, basically. And so the recruitment took place between 1931 and 1934, and it lured they were lured there kind of by the promise of jobs and better lives, but often only to meet tragic ends. So between 31 and 1936, the Lamis, they continued acting and performing in Karelia. But political opinions shifted a lot, certainly during Stalin's era. And her husband was targeted for not singing enough Russian songs or Karelian songs, for that matter. And so he was arrested in 38 and shot. And then she was also arrested and but her sentence was was expulsion to Lime Island in Lake Onega, was to mine the lime there. And so she was there, and that's where all the women went. So it was full of women and children. But she was released eventually, and then just lived her life in Russia and Karelia. So she never got to go back to the US or to Finland, for that matter. But there's this great story about her when she had to go on the boat with all the other women. She kind of stood at the bow, or as it was pushing away, and she sang, very defiantly, this Finnish song. You think you have power, but So she's really inspirational story, and a very sad, tragic story that happened to a lot of people actually during that time. So we always want to, I always want to honor and think of those men and women who had to go through that. And this next song is a song that I actually learned from my mother, and it was also heard in the workers' halls and the Finn halls. And my mother translated into English, and so I learned it from her, and it's called Ratajan Serenadi, or Toiler's Serenade. I remember still that sound so clear that I heard so often as a child. It was not the wind sighing through the trees. It was mother's cradle song to me. Tulanto, tilula, child, now go to sleep. Sang out my mother's voice so dear to me. Though to bondage you have been born, my child, freedom will, I promise, come someday. I remember father's tales he told as I sat at night upon his knee, of the harshness of the world he told. He would sing his songs at night to me. Tulanto, tilula, child, be on your guard. Sing out my father's voice so dear to me. You are marked, my child, as a slave to toil, and a tiny crumb will be your pay. I remember still my mother's songs and the evening tales my father told. Singing through life's storms, I must now go on, toiling at my heavy work each day. Tulanto, tilula, freedom from our chains, sing out to me, all voices of which slaves. The world belongs to those who work, not to those who rule, exploit, oppress. Tulanto, tilula, lastano, kuman soy mula ni arman ay tini. Vaika orjaks synnyt se maailman vapaus vil kerran koitapi. Freedom will, I promise, come someday. are you be able to, can you guys hear me? Is that still working? Okay. And how are we doing on time? So I thought, these women that came here did, they were midwives and they ran boarding houses. They just did whatever they could to make a living. And thank you. Thanks for that. I'm glad you can hear it. So I thought I'd read this poem. It's called When She Filled the Bowl, because this was another kind of work that Finnish immigrant women had. When she filled the bowl. We were brought together in the middle of that dense map of trees, where galaxies of mosquitoes spun around your ears, chinks of sunlight squeezed through pine needles. There was a woodbine confusion on all the paths at night. If you didn't follow the buzz and gasp of stars, you could be lost for good. If you, excuse me, I lay in my bed alone, raw wind scouring away every silence. I dreamed a deep green sea, men sloshing up on shore, pulling their seaweed beards, holding empty plates. I couldn't believe the money. When you haven't got any and it is given, it seems you are walking inside golden halos. All words spoken are soft and round. Hunger becomes a distant corner of dust, far from anything in your life, but not really that far. The lumber camp mess hall smelled of sweat and bread dough, the famished forever digging in their bowls. Great mounds of men appeared and disappeared all through the day. Their large slabs of hands waited in turn before the river of milk, pancakes stacked like cordwood, scooping oatmeal to their chapped boy lips, soups and stews to ride the dark, cold nothing of their bellies. I learned how to sandwich mercy and power between thick slices of bread. And when every scar of your life pulses with failing, sugar and butter shine brighter than any old world sun. I was the only woman in this home of axemen. Nobody bothered me. The future was already written. Money was the only word of love. So I thought there's this, my mother had a cousin, Hilma, who came to Finland from Finland to New York City in 1920 and got a job as a maid. And I remember my mother telling me this story, like, I think it was the 50s when, she had seen her periodically, but she said, oh, my lady isn't home. When my parents were visiting with my brothers, and you can come now to where I live. And so she showed them, and they were in the New York City Blue Book, I think. These were fairly well-off people. And so she toured the place a little bit, and then she opened the door and said, and this is my room. And my mother was shocked because, it was literally like a nun cell. It was just some tiny little room with one tiny little bed. And that was kind of it. I mean, maybe she had a little place to put her clothes, but it was a very limited experience. And she had done this for years. I mean, she just stayed there forever, decades. And so this is a poem kind of dedicated to her and all the other maids that are doing this kind of work today and all over the world for us. And it has a little epigraph in Finnish. Minua ei ole orjaksi luotu. I was not born to be a slave. Secrets live in small rooms. Perhaps this morning will be different, but she knows it is the same as always. There is her immigrant past that finds its level every day, sometimes a storm, sometimes shock, sometimes as distant as a story in a thin newspaper where you nod your head in faint recognition. There is her work, which in simple truth is boiling, scrubbing, folding people's lives into clean, sharp corners that poke at others who are soft or have sharper corners still. It is work for those with what is called wealth, who like to wallpaper their lives with a shimmering indifference. It is in a home where receive is the common language of the day, and the elegant interlocking of need and want, cross-stitch endless demands. This is the place where she had learned fatigue can be a pure kind of grieving. Sometimes, when the pigeons start their wing scrapes at her window and the whole smoky city is still asleep, she sits up in her little maid bed, studies the four corners of her room she has lived in many years, tucked down the hall from those she serves, and invents for herself a different future, a private life, a home with her children, digging in her garden, stirring spoons in her own pots, speaking of dreams with her forbidden husband that involve her own heart each and every day of the week instead of only on her one day off. So she did have a husband, but that was forbidden. So they were married for years, but it was a secret. And he was a chauffeur. He was from France, and he was a chauffeur for other wealthy people. And none of these people could ever get married. I mean, they could not admit it. So that was a secret that they had for years. But they did have that one day off a week. And I guess sometimes it lined up so they could be together then, but that was kind of it. So, so those, that's certainly happening now. Maybe not the marriage. Well, I don't know about the marriage part. And in different parts of the world, it's just, the underclass serve and experience different kinds of lives than the rest of us, of course. So, let's see. Do I have time? How am I on time?
You're doing,
I'm
you're
good.
doing great on
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I actually wanted
Yeah,
to
ask questions. Jump in.
to jump in. There's a few questions that I think are really relevant right
Okay.
now. Both two of them related to your aunt, and they were asking for your her name. And Dr. Jim Leary asks, was Cecilia Koittinen your great aunt Cecilia, because she made a bunch of recordings for the Library of Congress in 1937.
Yes. So Cecilia Kuitinen was my great aunt. And yes, she did. She was one of the people that was recorded by Alan Lomax, or the team of Alan Lomax that came through to the upper Midwest to record, which is such a great book. Can we plug the Jim Leary book? It's such a, that's an amazing document, which is right here. I'm sorry, Jim, it's like folk songs of the upper Midwest. Is that what it's called? Of the upper Midwest. But yeah, and she appears in there, and it was such a surprise because I got this book and there was my, there she was. But yes, Cecilia Kuitunen.
Great.
I'm happy to have her as a relative.
And you've been talking a lot about women doing some of the things that we don't necessarily hear about, right? Women in the labor movement, women working in these different industries, women as activists, which of course was a huge part of any immigrant story, but maybe not one we always hear. But we've got a question here that's kind of related to that. And someone writes, my mom grew up in a very Finnish Lutheran household in the UP. She wasn't allowed to dance or play music. So the music that we're talking about, the music that we're hearing, the music that you're singing was not necessarily something that all Finnish immigrants were dealing with. You've got kind of, church Finns who maybe weren't listening to this. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And I'm not the utmost expert at this because, of course, I knew there were the either the white Finns and the red Finns, or the church Finns and the the co-op Finns. And so I was, both sides of my family tended to be on they weren't the church Finns, but I know I've subsequently worked in the the community of Cokato, Minnesota, which is a lot of church Finns and other Finns as well. And yeah, I mean, that's a different experience they had growing up for sure. Where no, they didn't. Their dancing was not permitted, and the music that was there were hymns, of course, and a wonderful tradition of Finnish hymns, definitely, but not what you're hearing today for sure. It's a a different ethnic experience for them.
Great, thanks. We've got a couple more questions, but we'll
Okay.
we'll work those in as we go
Yeah,
along.
so here I'm going to circle back to another woman that I'm very enamored with. It's her name was Helmi Madsen, and I learned about her through my mother, who did quite a bit of translating of her poetry and her short stories or plays, actually. So Helmi, Helmi, she was born in 1890 in Finland and came over in the US, or I think she was in Canada for a while and then ended up in the US in America in 1911. And she was an activist in the Finnish-American Society. She was a writer and a commentator. She was the editor of the leftist women's newspaper Dovreitar for 10 years and then wrote for the newspaper Eteenpäin. She also wrote 500 poems, published 5 novels, serialized 7 other works of fiction in addition to writing full-length plays. So she was like this amazingly prolific person, and and was never tiring. I mean, she just worked all the time. So incredibly inspirational, and always, progressive forward and women forward, for everything. And so I'm very enamored with Helmi in so many ways. But this is a poem for her, and it's also dedicated to all the women in journalism, and particularly immigrant women in journalism, because now we're hearing about them more and more too. And that's, as you said, Marcus, this is what happens when immigrants come. I mean, we also hear their voices. Maybe they're not making money in the same way, and they're socioeconomically they're different, but then they're very active. And we hear their voices in different ways. So this is a poem called Mother Ink, and it's for Helmi Madsen. I take the black heap nothing of letters, blend story and map, reflect worry and shadow, align words into linear columns cast off from hot metal tattoos. Pulled from the weight of dream and despair, I am given speech from the lips and tongues of others and make a kind of imperfect song. And I am an imperfect mother that sets a table where the underclass of the world claim their chairs and tell their stories. There is always a code and an index strewn through my day, and the need to edit proliferates. I could say I ask for nothing but some kind of truth, a common language that answers the watchfulness and hunger in all of our voices. But instead, I rely on a linear metamorphosis, a kindled story to winding sheets, a wild twist of fortitude slamming like fists under crisp folds of printed pulp. So in my most recent CD that just came out, it was all about me. It's just basement tapes. I'm just sitting in the basement. I lost all my work. It was the pandemic, and I had been nudged by my daughter to maybe she should make another CD or something. And so I had a dear friend who gave me the equipment. It's just kind of live capture recordings, really. And it was really a great experience for me, I have to say. I just loved all of it. And it's just singer-songwriter stuff. It's all in English. I've never done that before. But I was so taken with a poem by Helmi called I Am Old and Young. And so she inspired this next song that starts, it's the first song on my new CD. And I think about it because of my work with seniors. I do a lot of some poetry classes and creative writing classes with seniors and assisted living, and also with the Alzheimer's Poetry Project. And I really miss them because all of that work, of course, much of it went away for quite a while, but I was able to do some later, which was so amazing because, that's kind of an invisible population in this country. We don't like the elderly or the elders or seniors, and these are our wise people. And I'm always sort of hurt by that. And I was raised in a culture, in my home, and maybe just, my heritage, that you should, revere the wise people in our culture. And so this is really her words that I've kind of messed with some, and her words are actually in this song, in the first beginning of each kind of verse there. But also I noticed, actually, I was looking at the poem again, I went, wow, I did knit some things in there that were also hers throughout. So it's called I'm a Volcano.
Everyone can see I am old, but I'm a volcano, and soft and warm like a dove, pushing out the hate, firing up the love. I am old and strong as steel, trust the wise, they don't conceal, never giving up, not giving in. The forever stupid can't forever win. I am old but not asleep. We gotta rescue us all from the deep. The human race invents so many dangers, multiplies too many grandeurs. I am old and all alone, still see me question as I roam. This day, this week, that time unfurls, a minute spills a miniature world. Life is sorrow, life is kind, drink it up like a fine old wine. It can heal, it can burn, everybody takes their turn. I am old and I am small, but look up high on the mountain, I won't fall, won't look away, will not resign. Truth keeps a hunger in my mind. Everyone can see I am old, but I'm a volcano, and soft and warm like a dove, pushing out the hate, firing up the love, pushing out the hate, firing up the love.
So I don't know if there are any other questions at all. I just want to say that during the pandemic, I was thinking a lot of my grandmother, who we lost to the last pandemic. So she left behind her husband and 4 children. It was a second wave of the last pandemic. And the youngest being my father, who was just turning 3. And so during this past year, I feel like, and all I kept thinking was, what was that like, and what we were experiencing this last year. And I do feel like we're making some of these new connections with each other that arc across the world as a result now. And I feel that there's much to take away from this global experience of loss. And I hope we have more capacity to open ourselves to new ways to communicate, and to kindness, to help each other, to make art, and for all of us to sing. So I just, I want to thank you guys for letting me be a part of this. I know we have some, maybe, I don't know if anyone's asking questions, but I just wanted to say that because I think, things are opening up now, but it's not over, and it's not over in the world. And I just kind of want to for us all to remember that too, and that we're all kind of in this together if we can. And let's sing. That's one thing we can do.
I mean, I think with that, we're all in this together. There's actually a really great question here that speaks to that to some extent. Someone mentions that there was a film made about farm women that kind of helped hold Finland together as the men went to war. And they're wondering then if you've done any songs, written any poetry about the immigrant Finnish women who worked the farm as their men worked, the grain harvest in the West or the mines in the forests, and that kind of itinerant labor that was really common for a lot of Finnish men who came to this country.
Yeah, I have not. And so now I have a great idea moving forward. Thank you for that. Because I think that, I missed all kinds of things. I have a list going, and it will be added to that list of all the different ways that we forget all those experiences of people that come here. And obviously I'm speaking about Finns, but yeah, I think those women worked so hard and in the field. I know that they did. And that's something I do want to address in the future.
We've also got a question specifically about one of your poems in which collection. So I Was Not Born a Slave. Is that in your most recent collection?
Yeah, the way she told her story.
All right, I'll put a link to that in the chat then. Okay. So one of the things that I've really appreciated about this is just all the many strands that come together, I think, when we look at immigration and the experience of women and the labor movement and work and kind of invisible work, the work that happens at home, that maybe isn't always recognized in the way it should be. So I really appreciate that coming together, because I think it's a lot of things that we've, as you mentioned, been faced with, dealing with during this pandemic, and the very real experience of longing and loss, and searching for something, as we're all in a very different situation than we've maybe been in before. And your latest CD, I love that you say, it was made in your ordinary basement during a very not ordinary time, but you bring in this Finnish inspiration, despite there being this, I think you said it was your first CD without any Finnish on it. But this Finnish inspiration that still comes through is really fascinating to me, because you're bringing in the words from Finnish to English, and there's sort of a rematriation, I suppose, in a sense, right? And we saw that with the Little Red Songbook that you pulled out. Joe Hill only wrote in Swedish, or excuse me, only wrote in English, but he was Swedish, and so you get this kind of repatriation through translation to Nordic immigrants. So I wonder if you could kind of talk a little bit about your experiences with translation and Finnish language as a way to connect to your Finnish heritage through poetry and music.
Yeah, I think when you are a third generation Finnish American, I'm being very general here and including people I probably shouldn't, but I think we have a lot of feelings of betrayal and loss because the language is not passed down to us. And there are really good reasons. It's not unusual for second generation anybody to not pass their language on to anyone. But I think there's a poem in my book called Dear Carl, and it talks a little bit about, my parents growing up in Finn Halls, or my mother, and then my dad got a job in Washington, D.C. And they were in Washington, D.C. Before he went off to war, and he worked in the Justice Department. He was a file clerk. And when he was looking through the file, he just saw all these, he grew up in Embarrass, Minnesota, so he found all these names of all these farmers, who obviously were very, very scary people to the FBI at that time, because they were cast in that shadow of, oh, he must be a communist and that's so evil, because it was, ramping up to the McCarthy era. And so then the McCarthy era came after the war. And I think a lot of Finns who grew up in that particular, not the church Finns, but the other Finns, went, whoa, this isn't really something we can share. Not that they were, they were all like, my parents went to church, and, they were nice suburban people, and, because they were trying to, there was like weird assimilation that had to go on for their parents, and then another strange assimilation for them to sort of repudiate how they grew up, which was loss for them. So there's this sort of this continuation of longing and loss and belonging and not knowing. So they weren't going to go around unless I had a grandparent, which is how later generations often knew the language. There was a grandparent, and I didn't have that near me at all. I would have learned more, but they really did not want to teach me. I mean, and that wasn't unusual either. So it's been a really hard thing to reckon with, because it's so part of my DNA and my identity, and I don't have the language. It's not one you pick up really easily. Sorry, Finnish folks, this is a hard language. And I certainly, been to Finland. I certainly studied Finnish. I tried to sing it. I mean, my attempts, I'm sure, are lacking, but it's so tied to the culture and how important it is that I carry that loss as well. And so I think that's what brought me to wanting to sing in it. And I started singing in high school. I don't know. I was in my bedroom. Oh, I like this song. And then, then started playing canteles, and I just sort of embraced this thing because I didn't have the words, and I couldn't communicate with my relatives. We go up north, and it was like we were in Finland. Everybody spoke. I was the only kid, and no one else spoke English. I mean, the younger generation, obviously the second generations, but none of the third generation or first immigrants weren't really speaking English that much there. So I think it brought me to, I never knew my grandmothers. And this is what I always say, I started singing Finnish to talk to my grandmothers. And because that was some way to communicate and honor them, and be witness and continue some sort of lineage in the only way I could figure out how to do it, which is incomplete, but then it always is. There's this great quote, Joni Inkula is a great Finnish poet. I think I have it here somewhere. And he has this great poem, and he says it's called Genealogy, his poem, and he says, everything in me is a contagious debt, and my heart has nothing to pay it with, since the echoes of its pulse cannot go backwards. And that's what I kept finding out when I was in Finland, or I've been doing this stuff forever. I can't go backwards. I mean, I went and walked all those lands and visited, went through all of my genealogy, the pilgrimage of going to all the different places my relatives lived. But in the end, that's about as far as you can get. And so you learn that it's still going to be kind of an emptiness, but so full in your heart nonetheless. So it's really a dichotomy in a way, and you carry it with you and you carry it forward. And I guess it's always this, if I feel haunted, it's because, I still am so moved by so many aspects of my Finnish heritage that it will always be a part of me, and I'll always be doing it. And I attempt it with the language, I attempt it in translation, I want to keep it going. And I thought, I kind of like slid it into this CD because, I don't have to, I can say lyrics by Helmi Madsen, whoever that would be to anybody else. But I just thought, no, this stands as another part of my my ancestry. So it's all approximation, it's all we can do.
That's wonderful. I mean, you said at the very beginning, you mentioned haunting and said, it doesn't necessarily need to be a bad thing, right? And what you just described is a sort of haunting that isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's something you carry with you and makes you who you are. That's wonderful. We've got a question here. Are you familiar with some of the songs of that Marjorie Edgar collected in Songs from Metzola?
Yes.
Excellent. Yeah.
Yes, and a wonderful book, that Joyce Hakala also put together. And so that's just another amazing document to keep alive all of, that part of the heritage too. So we're always grateful for anybody who goes to the trouble of, I mean, here Marjorie had done all that work, and then who was she? And so then Joyce came and said, no, this is somebody. There's another important woman, one woman looking at another important woman to keep that part of the heritage within this country going. So it's an amazing document. It's a great book and has great, selection of material in it.
We've got.
Diane. Oh, go ahead, Marcus.
I was just gonna say we've got another question here about kind of making connections to what's been going on recently, and someone asked, what is this Finnish-American protest tradition that you've spoken to, the tradition of activism and protest? What can that offer us today in terms of social issues that we're all grappling with?
Well, it's all the same stuff, really. I mean, my grandfather was worked in the co-ops, so it was all about, and then he was in the IWW as well, which means, workers' rights, women's rights, racial equality, equity, women's rights. I mean, it's what's going on now. These were all issues at that time that they were working really hard for. They weren't always appreciated for it, just like, I don't know if we're ever appreciated for it. Because we were kind of, the later incoming immigrants at that time of like that first decade of the 1900s. And so, if you were a church fan, I'm sure you kind of slid in a little easier, but I think it was at times a little more of a challenge if you were saying, this is wrong. My grandfather came here to avoid conscription in the Tsar's army. So right away, he's coming in here and he's involved in the co-op, and my grandmother was as well. Because you want everyone to, there are food deserts, right? And so why do we have food deserts, and why don't we have cooperative? Why isn't the food for everybody, and why isn't there education for everyone? In the Finn halls, the tradition was you could come and get a meal if you didn't have food. There was a library, so you had free access to books. You could come and have, discussions about whatever. I mean, it was about community. And of course, then there was the performances and the music and the theater and all of that. And I think there was medical aspects to it too. So again, I mean, you hit on all those, you hit those buttons, and it's all the stuff that we're still, dealing with in different ways now. So, and they, in many ways, those halls and the co-ops were really successful models. But, are those halls, most of them, of course, are gone. And the co-ops that they, maybe there's some that have lived on, and there are some, certainly the cooperative movement is still going. But I think some of those, history repeats itself, obviously, and we're all still learning and finding our way through and trying to be inclusive. And I think, that's the goal. And I think that was their goal. How successful, they were, I can't say I wasn't there, but I know about some of it, and I know about the stuff in my family. And I mean, I think that we're just all, again, we're all in this together, and there are so many ways, so many models that we can keep trying to enact and include people.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, and to bring it back to your music, of course, and you know, a song like Rebel Girl, I think Joe Hill at one point said something along the lines that, you know, once you teach someone a song, no one can take that from you. You can burn books, you can, you know, burn down Finn halls, but you can't take someone's song, you can't take their music. And so the songs that you've sung for us today, the poetry that you read for us today, I think really speaks to that aspect as well. So it's really, really beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
I just wanted to share this comment. We have Dr. Allen in notes here. You were so eloquent in commenting on your background. You definitely inherited your parents' sense of tradition, community, and family, and he remembers them both so well. So I thought that was a really wonderful thing. It was nice to share with everyone.
Yeah, I miss them every day. They were amazing. Amazing parents. I was lucky that way. And they embraced, but they had shunned it kind of, and then I watched them embrace it, their heritage. When I was, the funny thing about this, the reason I am here probably was because of you, Hanus. When I was maybe 14 or 15, there was a big celebration, and I never, I thought, oh, I have to go to a Finnish thing with my parents, and it was this somebody's beautiful backyard, and then all the women had their costumes on and flowers in their hair, their big bowls of strawberries, and there was live music, and I just thought it was like a dream. Like it was cinematic. And right away then I went, okay, this Finnish thing is a lot different and deeper than I thought it was, and it has joy and beauty in it that I wasn't aware of, and that turned me, I have to say. So and my parents embraced their full speed ahead, went from 0 to 60. It was always there for them, but they became very active in the Finnish community in their 50s and onward.
I think it's really interesting to think about when we as immigrants or children of immigrants or grandchildren of immigrants, how and when we embrace our heritage or sometimes reject it, right? But the language thing keeps popping up in the chat here, so it was really wonderful to hear you speak to that. As someone mentioned that for them, Finnish is the language of love, because Finnish was the language that their parents spoke and their grandparents spoke, and even though you didn't necessarily get it with you, it triggers all those emotions, which is a really wonderful way of thinking about that type of haunting, right?
Yeah, and that's a beautiful, I mean, love is the beautiful kind of haunting, isn't it? So, and I agree with that. I have tapes of my mother reading her poetry readings, and it's and she's reading obviously her own work in English, but also in Finnish, and it's it just kind of goes right to the solar plexus. It's something that we can't describe, and that's what art is. Right? It's indescribable and how it affects us, and it's kind of a visceral kind of experience. And I find that also, as that person mentioned about the language and how powerful it can be in a very beautiful way.
Diane, I have a sort of a question that's still forming in my mind, but a number of elements of your songs and your poems and your reflections have struck me as creating the links through haunting from the past, using the past to kind of shape the future. And you've invoked the memory of Viola Turpinen and Katri Lammi and these women who've helped shape your work. I'm wondering, and you referred to mentorship. I'm wondering if you could talk about the different mentors that you've drawn from through your career, and maybe reflect about a little bit about how your work, your body of work is creating something for the future beyond us.
Well, I don't know if I'm doing that. I'm just doing what artists or writers or musicians do. We're just doing the work. I think I've had lots of mentors along the way. I mean, my mother was a huge mentor just because, you know, I think she was like a high school teacher and then just worked all kinds of different jobs and kept secret this poetic life. So she wrote on grocery slips and then hid them in her drawers of her vanity, and no one knew that. And then suddenly, when she's like in her mid 50s, and the Loft Literary Center opened up in Minneapolis, she said, well, I'm just going to go take a class. And then from then on, I got to watch this growth and sort of fluorescence of an artist. I mean, she just sort of went, okay, this is what I am now. And when I was like, in junior high or whatever, and so it was like, I started reading all the books that she had, because she was in classes all the time. And then she started, like, her first book of poetry was published when she was 60. So here was somebody who was a role modeling that you don't have to be a certain age to do something in the arts or to do anything really. And that's an incredible gift. And then to watch someone have this new passion and form themselves as an artist just right in front of your eyes, and so, and she had Alzheimer's later on, but she still, like 7 books later, it's like, well, no, I have to work on this. And so we worked on it together because she really wanted to put it out. It was important. It was like, I am this person and I need to do this. And so that was an amazing mentor, because it's like so many layers of mentorship going on there, and very supportive. Gave me a guitar when I was 12. I didn't ask for one, and I didn't even know I wanted one. And then I got one, and then look what happened. I mean, it was like, so, but I mean, and they tend to be, a range of people who've, influenced me or helped me along the way. And they've been a lot of writers, I would say. But I mean, I have the last song on my new CD is dedicated in part, I don't say much, but it's dedicated to Joni Mitchell. And because Joni Mitchell was just sort of still this very iconic female singer-songwriter who took, it wasn't everybody, she's mad that someone thinks that she's a memoirist kind of songwriter, and she is not. She says, the art is what brings the feeling, and growing up, she was this incredible role model and mentor for how you can do it any way you want, and continue morphing as you go and growing as you go. And for someone like me, who I'm very eclectic, and so I've done I started kind of on the, sort of musically in the folk thing, and then I hopped that to the jazz thing, and then I hopped that to the world music thing, and then I hopped that, back to singer-songwriter stuff. And I think that the main people that I have been influenced by or mentored by were the people who gave me permission to do it any way I wanted to, if it seemed like it was honest and there was truth in it and it mattered. And so I have a long list, and I'm just sort of spacing. I have a whole wall of writers here, and it's just endless amount of people I could list, but and I can email it to anybody if I don't know what it is, but it is, it never ends. And I'm constantly inspired by people, and younger generations of incredible writers and musicians coming up, always blown away. And I share them with my students because I think there's always so much. What I learned from my mother is that you're constantly learning, and I'm constantly learning. I'm not done. I'll never stop that. So I don't know if that answered your question at all, but.
It did. Thank you. I just, I really appreciated your you're just drawing so much that, and the names that you've mentioned, drawing so much on the past, but also your creative direction, and how it's changed. And I love that sentiment of the having the permission to go in the direction that you're drawn to. It's really wonderful.
Hmm. Thanks.
We did have one other question in the Q&A, about any connections for Finland's Eastern and Western cultures. And I don't know if you have any, if that sparks any ideas in you, but it did come through, and I wanted to talk
Yeah, I'm not
to you.
sure what they mean by that.
Nor am I. If we can get some clarification on the question, then we'll throw it
I'm
back.
very fascinated with all of, regionally, certainly the music of Finland and all the different cultures within it. I'm very moved by them and inspired by them, but I'm not sure what they're referring to.
I think we've had a number of just comments about how your reflections have resonated with people and their family stories and the links they have to their ancestors. And I think there are so many family stories that are mirrored in yours and in your music and your art, and that is coming through in the comments, I think.
Oh, great. Because, when you're doing this, it's kind of like crapshoot, and you're just shooting stuff out in the universe, and you never think it's going to hit any targets at all, ever. And then when I feel as I'm an American, and then I've had the gall really to sit there and record all this music in Finnish, and and I'm sure that everyone wants to sit me down and go, nah, that's not quite it, but at the same time, I hope they, the reason I do it, it's a very emotional thing. It comes from deep inside. It's I do it with a lot of, hopefully it appears anyway, a lot of reverence, because it is very important to me. So I'm glad that I'm not missing marks. Whatever I'm trying to do, that somebody's can kind of, recognize something or experience something. I'm very grateful for that.
Well, we've got a few minutes left. If anyone has any final questions for Diane, Jarvi, as we're wrapping up here, but I did want to wish you congratulations on this new album. And are you working towards anything new in this in the wake of that release?
Yeah, it's I'm working on a novel, and is Finland in it? Yes. I cannot escape this, you guys. It just walks around with me, whatever I'm trying to do. So, I'm in early drafts of it, and who knows if anyone will ever see it, but that there is a novel, and it takes place in the US, but it also goes to Finland in it as well. And I think I've had the most fun of all these projects, I have to say, in writing it, just because it's different. It's a different genre for me, and I've just had a blast. So even if, I'm the only one who ever sees it, I'm totally satisfied with that. And then I'm working on a couple poetry manuscripts. So, whenever those show up in the world, if they ever do, but they're being worked on too.
That's great. We do have one more question that came in here asking about different influences in your work, specifically if there's any kind of Baltic influence, not just Finnish, but Baltic in general influence in your work.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I resonate to all the Baltic countries and those cultures. And I mean, I love Estonian music and I love Latvian music actually. And it's, and I love music from Russia. I mean, I love all of the, well, with if playing the kantala, because there's that instrument is kind of all around the Baltic as well, and those versions of it. So all of those countries have impacted me musically, just because, well, here are other voices and this is what they sound like here, even though it's not the same as Finland, but there's essences that they share, and then there's definitely things that stand alone from those cultures. And so I love all of that. I love all the Baltic music. It's all been I'm trying to think of how I what's the word I'm looking for? It has it's another tapestry to the culture, because it is, I find that I resonate to those cultures in so many ways, and well, obviously with Estonian, because it's, linguistically there's so many similarities, and but it's I just feel like it's a bigger part of my family. Maybe I'm being, too bold there, but it lives for me that way, those places and those cultures. As does Sweden, actually. So
Great, thank you. We have one question here, one remaining question, and it's a tricky one.
uh-oh.
Do you think we have time for a Kantele song? If
Oh
you
yeah, I
have-
was gonna do one.
Excellent. Yeah.
Yeah, I have one
Let's
for
do
you.
it.
It's actually, I'm singing and playing. Is that allowed?
I think that sounds amazing.
So my mother was, and I am actually, from things that had translated for me, a very great admirer of Arvo Turtiainen, who's a Finnish poet. And he wrote this beautiful poem called Minakaisten, it's called, sorry, Minakuulin naisten laulavan, which means I heard women singing. And my mother had translated it in her last book when she had Alzheimer's. And it's just one of those really moving poems that says, I heard women singing countless numbers of women's voices, each in her own way. Old women sang to their sons, and young women sang of their own strength. The early morning was in their voices, the rising sun in their words. And I realized that my own life was being sung in their voices, and they were singing for everyone. I heard women singing. I don't know if you'll be able to hear this or not.
Minä kuulin naisten laulavan, lukaimattujen niiden naisenien, jokaisen omalla tavallaan. Minä kuulin naisten laulavan. Minä kuulin naisten laulavan, jokaisen omalla tavallaan. Vanhat naiset lauloivat pojilleen, nuoret naiset lauloivat voimastaan. Minä kuulin naisten laulavan, kuin aamu oli heidän äänensä, kuin nouseva aurinko sanat. Minä kuulin naisten laulavan, minä kuulin naisten laulavan, ja tajusin itselleen laulevan heidän suullaan. Minä kuulin naisten laulavan. laulevan, in a golden nice and laulavan, in a golden nice and laulavan, in a golden nice and laulavan.
Thank you so much for indulging us with, with one more tune.
I think you've all been indulging me. So thank you. Thank you. I just want to say thank you to the University of Wisconsin at Madison, to you, Anna and Marcus. Really, really, this is really wonderful. To Jim Larry, I love you. To everybody, and for FinFest, because this is, again, like I said, I think this was my 9th FinFest experience, and I'm just feeling so grateful and fortunate that I was able to be a part of it, and honored to be included this year.
Well, we were honored to have you. We really appreciate you and your work, and for taking the time to join us today. We are a little over time. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, for joining us, for sharing your thoughts and comments and questions with us. And I'll just make a brief plug for our next event, which is in August, August 28th. Same time, same place, as it were, with Eric Peltonaimi. He is the next presenter in our music series. But for now, thank you so much to Diane Jarvi and to Marcus and FinFest USA for joining with us in this music series. Thanks everyone for joining, and we wish you all a wonderful day.
Talk to you.